What's going on, everybody? I hope all is well. Today we're breaking down one of the most famous drum beats of all time, the halftime shuffle. This is a really fun groove to play because of its unique sound and feel, but it can drive you nuts because it's such a tricky puzzle to put together. So today I want to break this thing down for you and talk about the specific challenges you're going to face when you try to play this thing. Alright, there are many different variations of this groove. You've got the classics that everyone talks about, like the Purdy Shuffle from songs like Home at Last by Steely Dan. You've got the Porcaro Shuffle from Toto's Rosanna. And you've got the Bonham Shuffle from Led Zeppelin's Fool in the Rain. And there are many others out there that I wish people would talk about more. I personally really dig Jason McGurr's playing in the Death Cab for Cutie song Grapevine Fires, and Jack Bevan's playing in the Foals song A Knife in the Ocean. But if you're just starting to learn this beat, I wouldn't begin with any of those examples. You want to instead start with something really generic, so you can just focus on the fundamentals, and then you can get into the more creative stuff after. And if you take all the various interpretations of this beat that are out there and you boil them down, you're going to get this hand pattern. Then you just put a bass drum pattern underneath that. And for today, we'll use this pattern. So first up today, I want to break down what's happening there and show you how to make this groove feel good. And then after that, I want to share with you some practical next steps to take this groove to the next level by changing up that bass drum pattern and throwing in some fills. And the place you gotta start when you begin learning this beat is the hi-hat pattern. And what you have here is a broken triplet kind of feel. Triplet, 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 triplet. Notice that even at that slower tempo, I'm not muscling out those notes. I'm not going tap, 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 where the stick's just going straight up and straight down. I'm instead using this kind of cutting or jousting motion. And what that allows me to do is move from the edge to the top of the hi-hats really efficiently. And that gives the hi-hats this nice dynamic pulse. Check it out. What you want to do is first extend your arm so you can hit the edge of the hi-hats with the shoulder of the stick. Then you move your arm back by bending at your elbow, and you notice your wrist kind of bends down here, and that allows you to give a little tap to the top of the hi-hats with the tip of your stick. And you just go out and in, out and in. Edge, top edge, top edge, top edge, top edge, top edge. You can see it kind of takes on this little cutting motion, and that gives you this fluid, round motion to pull off the whole thing. You can get plenty fast with just that technique where the stick is staying in the pocket of your hands, and a lot of people play it just like that. But I find for myself personally, I can get even more efficient, I can get even more speed if I incorporate some fingers as well. So my hand starts to open up a little bit. I start to pull with my fingers, and I just add that in to that motion. For the next step, you want to add ghost notes on the snare drum into the gaps of that hi-hat pattern. To make that feel right, you want to be sure that you're keeping those triplet subdivisions nice and smooth. You also want to be sure that you're playing those ghost notes as soft as humanly possible. Otherwise, it's going to clog everything up and make the groove sound chaotic. And this is a key area where people really struggle when they play this beat. And so I want to give you a couple tips to help you play these ghost notes really softly. The first tip is to have your drumstick resting over the snare drum at a bit of an angle. And so you can see here that my wrist is raised slightly over the snare drum. And so that causes this taper effect where the stick is now going to hit the drum at an angle, meaning that less surface area of the stick is going to make contact. And so it'll be a bit softer. The second tip is one I got from Bernard Purdy watching his videos demonstrating this groove. And I noticed that as he plays his ghost notes, he moves them a bit to the outside of the drum, which means that the drum's going to resonate less and make the notes a bit softer. And then as he plays his backbeats, he goes back to the center. So he's kind of subtly going back and forth. And yes, that does kind of change the tone of the drum, but it's never been an issue for me. It's never picked up on recordings I've done, and so I don't think that's a huge factor. It just really helps with that dynamic level. All right, for the next step, we're going to add in the snare drum backbeat. And we're actually going to be putting it on beat 3, which might sound weird because most of the time when we play grooves, we're putting the backbeat on 2 and 4. And so when we play a normal shuffle, for example, it's like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, da, 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 da. But with a halftime shuffle, the reason it's called the halftime shuffle is because that backbeat's on beat 3. And that just gives it a more open feel. So it's like this. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, da 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 da, 3, da 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 da, 3, da 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 da. And I want you to notice when I demonstrate this for you that when I add in the backbeat, I actually lose one of the ghost notes in the chain. It's the ghost note that directly follows the backbeat. And there are versions of the halftime shuffle out there, namely the Picaro shuffle on Rosanna, that keeps that ghost note there, but it makes the groove so much harder to pull off. And I would not recommend trying that, right away when you're just beginning to learn this thing. So check this out. As you can see, it's really just the same thing over and over again, where the backbeat cuts off the ghost notes just temporarily, but you pick right back up with them, and they continue to spill over the bar line over and over again. And after a while, the pattern just starts to take care of itself. Once you've got that hand pattern up to a pretty good speed, you can try adding in a basic bass drum pattern underneath. Just try to not let it influence the flow of what you've already got going. Now that we have all the notes in place and we've talked about the techniques required to pulling this thing off, I want to talk to you guys briefly about how to make this thing feel good, and then we'll talk about some next steps, okay? And I've addressed it a couple times, but I really want to drive this home. To make this thing feel good, you have to give it dynamic depth. You can't have all the notes at the same dynamic level because it's going to sound flat. It's not going to have any punch to it, and people do not dance to triple it, triple it, triple it, triple it, which is what it's going to sound like if the ghost notes and the hi-hats are right up there with the kick and the snare. What people dance to is the relationship between the bass drum and the backbeats. They want to feel boom, boom-ba, boom, boom-ba. And those triplets should just be underneath all that to add to the feel. Boot, 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 right? That's what you're going for when you practice this thing. And so one exercise I like to share with my students is I like to have them start by playing the groove completely flat on purpose and then transition to giving the groove dynamic depth by lowering the ghost notes and the hi-hats. And that gives them a sense of how that feels to play it right. It allows them to hear the difference in a way that just going for the right way doesn't. So that's where I'd recommend starting with this beat. You get the independence down, you make sure you're playing with smooth subdivisions and the right techniques, and you make sure you have that dynamic depth happening so it all feels good. After that, I want to suggest a couple practical next steps. And the first next step you should definitely try out is you want to put a bunch of different bass drum patterns underneath that hand pattern. And that'll do one very important thing. It'll force you to loosen up, which is something that's easier said than done with this beat, because a lot of the time when people practice the halftime shuffle, They just practice one variation of it. And so over time, they actually get worse at it because they get more and more stiff, more and more locked in to the same thing. And this is kind of counterintuitive, but the secret to making this thing feel right is you got to play loose. Boom, ba, boom, ba. You got to be moving. You got to be malleable. And that just doesn't happen if you play the same thing. So by throwing a bunch of different bass drum patterns at the groove, it forces you to kind of shift your weight, to figure things out, and to think on your feet. And that's the first step in becoming comfortable with this beat. So I'll play a few examples for you so you can hear what I'm talking about. And by the way, I'll have the transcription for these examples and a bunch of other ones linked in the description box where you'll be able to hear each individual example. You can slow them down, speed them up, and work at your own pace. The other practical next step I want to recommend you guys try working on is pairing fills up with this groove. This will again force you to loosen up and figure out how to navigate moving to and from the fills. And you're going to see that sometimes you got to leave a note or two out from the groove in order to move to a fill or come back from a fill. That's just something you got to feel out and learn how to do. This will also help you learn how to improvise within the feel of this groove and really live inside it. You got to start with just one fill at a time, going back and forth, figuring out how to do that, go into another fill, and over time you're going to build up your vocabulary of usable fills, and all of a sudden you'll just be thinking about phrases instead of all the notes. And that's where improvisation begins. So I'll play a few different examples for you guys to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. And again, I'll have the transcription for these examples along with a bunch of other ones that you can work on linked in the description box. So that's it, you guys. Get the groove feeling good, try a bunch of different bass drum variations underneath, and then pair it up with a bunch of fills, and you're going to be well on your way to mastering this thing and learning songs that incorporate this beat and just having fun with it. But thanks as always for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you all next time. You take it easy. Bye-bye.